All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We are recording the session, so we'll be able to pass this along to anybody that can't make it, and we can pass along to you to forward along to anybody as well. Just a quick introduction. My name is Greg Rumlard with Alteryx. I'm an account executive here. Thank you so much for joining the first of 3 audit analytics trainings today. I'm going to be handing off to Parm here in just a second to run with the training and let him introduce himself, but I will cover a few housekeeping items to begin with. First and foremost, you are all in a view-only mode within WebEx, so you won't be able to speak to us, but you can chat us with any questions. We'll try to get all of those answered either via chat or via a live kind of Q&A at the end. If we can't do that, we'll follow up with you over email to follow up with that specific question. With that being said, feel free to follow along with the training via your own license if you have it, trial license. And I'll hand it off to Parm to go ahead and introduce yourself and get it kicked off. Parm?
Greg and the Alteryx team for arranging this. I've sent out an email to everyone, and I'm hoping everyone received it. It was to generate an API key for a government-sanctioned website. And if not, in the email, I also provided a link to download the actual data. So I will start with, actually, let me share my screen right now. Greg, I'm unable to share my screen.
Oh, let me go ahead and make you a presenter here, Parm.
All right, thanks.
There we go. Now you should be able to do it.
Yeah, I'm good now. Okay, so just to quickly give some background here, I'm going to just go to that government website and kind of show you guys what that website is. So this is the website. In the email I sent, this was the link I provided. If you just fill this information up and hit sign up, you'll get emailed a link which will have your API key in there. I'm not going to cover the documentation of this website, but if you go through the documentation, it tells you how to use that API key. So I'm hoping most of you already have it. So this is how that API key works. So what I did was I grabbed an input, text input from the in-out grouping over here. And if I scroll over, you'll notice that here's that government website. I'm downloading a consolidated screening list. And here's my API key that they provided me when I signed up. Okay? And then I'm just going to hit play up here and show you what happens. So actually, you'll see on the right anchor that that's just the URL. Sorry, I need to do the download here now. Give me 1 second. So if you under the developer tools, there's a download tool. So this will allow me to pass this URL to that API and then download the data. So you'll notice if I come back to this site, I've called this field URL. And to this download tool, all I'm doing is I'm saying pass the URL to the download tool. You'll see I have no other fields. If I had more fields, I could specify different fields. And then the output that's coming out the right anchor gave me the data as a string information. So then, so I'll hit run again. We're going to be hitting run a lot here. Just going to wait for it to finish. So you'll see it took 4.3 seconds to run. And, oh, where's my... Oh. So on this browse tool, you'll see the information that came out of the right anchor here. You'll see it provided me the URL, and it actually provided me the data set that I want to work with. This message 200 OK, it's a message from the API saying that everything worked fine. So what I want to show you is this downloaded data. Even though you're only seeing a couple headers here, if I right-click and I say copy, select without headers, I go to Notepad and I paste it in here. And I just want to show you guys how the data is coming down. This is how the data is actually coming down, okay? You'll see that it's not lined up nicely. If I go to Notepad++ and I paste it here, this is what I want the data to look like so I can work with it. I just wanted to show you guys that. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to make the data workable. Let me just close this as well. So what we're going to do is, excuse me, we're going to use text to columns. So in this parse category, you'll see we have text to columns. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to change this downloaded data record into multiple records, kind of like what I showed you in Notepad++. So what I'm going to say is take the downloaded data column, and I don't have delimiters, but what I'm going to do is at the end of each record, there was a carriage return line feed. So if I do a \n, that's basically saying the end of the record with the carriage return line feed. And I'm not going to split this into columns. I'm going to split this into rows. So now if I stick a browse after this, just to show you what happens, when I hit run, it's almost done here. When I hit run, you'll notice that it took that downloaded one record and it created multiple records. So it has now created 10,742 records, okay? What I'm going to do here is I'm going to drop this URL field and the downloaded header field by using the select. So I'll just add a select here, and I'm going to uncheck the URL and then uncheck downloaded headers. So now I just have downloaded data coming out of this anchor. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the parse tool once again. And you'll notice over here that the file is actually comma delimited. You'll see the commas after each field and each field type. So what I'm going to do is I've already read the API, so I know already that there is 27 columns in this data that's coming down. Normally, you'd want to read the API documentation so it could give you a file description and tell you how many columns there are in the file. So then, now I'm going to add another browse just so I can show you what's going on.
And Parm, real quick, if you wouldn't mind just taking a quick step back, and maybe for those people that didn't get the email and didn't see the data before the training, can you just kind of cover on a high level what we're trying to accomplish here in terms of the data that we're working with and the use case here?
Yeah, of course. So the data we're working with is a government-provided sanctioned list. And in this first column, it tells you where that record came from, what the source is right here. And what we're trying to do is we're just trying to cross-reference a vendor master, which a lot of organizations do from an audit perspective, to make sure that none of the vendors that they're working with are on a government-sanctioned list. Because if that ever became public knowledge, it'd be a publicity nightmare to deal with, that this organization was doing business with someone that's on a government sanctioned list. So I hope that helps. So once again, you'll see I parsed this record out. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab another select tool because I'm going to drop this first field. So I'm going to grab this select and drop the first field. And you notice all my other fields are 1 to 27. But if you look over here, you'll see my first record has the field names in it. So Alteryx has this great tool, right here called Dynamic Rename. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that to the canvas, and I'm going to say here, take my field names from the first row of data. So instead of creating a formula field to rename all 27 columns, this will automatically do it for me. So I'm going to once again stick a browse. Actually, I don't need to stick a browse. I could just show you real quick. So I just want to, every time I've hit run here, it's actually gone out to the government website and grab that data fresh. So if the government just updated that data set in the last, say, 5 minutes, I've downloaded the latest data set. So you can see on the right side of this anchor, I have field names for all my records now. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to do is, as you can see from the data, excuse me, as you can see from the data, in my name column, the one I'm going to be matching on right here, I see quotes in the data. I even see quotes here, I see quotes there, and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Alteryx's data cleansing tool. So once again, I don't need to create calculated fields or formula fields to clean up that data. I'm basically saying go through all my records here, remove leading, trailing white space. I'm going to remove tab, line breaks, or duplicate white space. And I'm going to remove punctuation because you can see there's quotes in that data set. The other thing, I'm just going to quickly run that again and show you that the data has been cleaned up. And we'll get to our vendor data in a couple of minutes here. So you can see now, out of my right anchor here, all my data has been cleaned. So if I click on the left-hand side, this is the data going into the tool. And when I click on the right-hand side, this is the data coming out. So all my records are now cleaned up. However, I want to show you one quick thing. When I click on this select tool, you can see that the size of each of my fields is huge. It's extremely big. I don't need my fields to be that big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this auto field. I'm going to drag it to the canvas. And I'm basically saying go through all my fields and automatically adjust the lengths and types of those fields. So if I'm just going to drag a select to show you what it did to all the fields. So when I hit run here this time, we'll wait 4.3 seconds because that's how long it's been taking us. So many of you might be wondering, where is this data? Did it download it to a file? Is it in Alteryx database somewhere? This data, as of this point right now, is actually sitting in memory. So whenever Alteryx loads data into a workflow, it loads the data into memory and it works with the data through memory, which is why it's extremely fast. So you can see that after this auto field, it's readjusted the size of all my fields. I still got a big one here, but most of them are pretty good field sizes now versus what it was over here. One other thing I want to show you real quick.
Parm, if there's any way to zoom in a little bit, it's a little tough to see for a few people on the webinar.
How's that?
Perfect. That's better.
Okay. Yep. All right. Thanks for pointing that out. The other thing I want to show you guys is I've been hit run every single time I've added something to the canvas, and every single time it's been going out to this government website and downloading the data. I don't have to do that. What I could do is I could just right-click here, or even here, and then say cache and run workflow. So what that does is I've cached and run the workflow now. It's just going to cache if we wait the 4.3 seconds. Actually 7.6 now. But you'll see that everything's grayed out here. That's telling me that it's cached the data set. Every time I hit run now, it's not going to go out to the government website and re-download the data. It's just going to run from this point onwards. So if I were to hit run here again, it's instantaneous, 0.2 seconds. So for now, I'll just leave it like that so I'm not going out to the website to basically get the data every single time. One other thing that we need to do, I want to identify the source of this data set for what I'm going to do downstream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a formula field. So I'll add a formula to the canvas. And I'm just going to add a field here and call it source. I'm actually going to call it sources. And the reason for that is if you look in my data set, I have a field here called source already. So I'm just going to call it sources. So like Excel and other tools out there, you can see that Alteryx has a lot of these functions. But all I'm doing is I'm just going to name this, I'm going to put a quote in here and call it government list. So I know this is the government list data source. So I provided a link with the data sources as well. The data sources that you guys have were up to this point. So after this point, I basically provided a CSL.yxdb. So you can drag this to the canvas, and these to follow along from this point on for the people that didn't get the API key. And I will provide this workflow to everyone after the session. So I'm going to do one more thing here. Oh, I guess I didn't do it. Government list. There we go. And I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to take this record ID. I'm going to add a record ID field. And I'll explain to you a little bit later in about 15 minutes why I did that. So I'm going to change this to a string field, the length of 6. Okay. So now let's go get our vendor data. So I provided a link with the vendor data as well. So I'm going to say input data. And I'm going to say file. So I can connect to many different data sources, obviously. And here is the vendor data that I want to connect to. So you can see that it loaded a preview of the first 100 records of my vendor data. So just to point out, this vendor data is no client's vendor data. It's mocked up vendor data for this workflow for this training session. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a select on here. So whenever I work on anything within Alteryx, I add a select here whether I need it or not. What this select does for me is it tells me the field types, their lengths, and so forth. The other reason I do it is I might be a pretty big organization basis, or I may have acquired a company and they have their own vendor database and we have our own vendor database. What this allows me to do is basically just change the input and then use the select tool to rename columns if I need to. So once again, on this side, I'm going to add a formula field. And I'll explain to you why I'm adding this formula field in about a couple of minutes here. I'm going to add a column. I'm going to call this sources as well. So basically, I'm saying the source of this file is the vendor data set. And then once again, I'm going to add the record ID here as well. So you'll notice these two fields that are tools that were added are the same as these two tools right here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a select because I'm only going to pass 3 fields downstream. Okay. So I'm going to say deselect all. I want my record ID. I want my vendor name, and I want sources. And in about 2 minutes, I'll show you why I'm doing that. So, excuse me. So up here, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to grab my select tool, add it at the end here. I'm going to have to start moving these things over, getting tight. And I only want this, I want 3 fields as well. So I'm going to deselect all. I'm going to select my record ID. I want my sources. And I want my name field, because the name field from the government list are the actual vendor names. So what we're going to do next is we're going to union these 2 data sets. So we're going to append them together. Excuse me. So I'm going to grab this union tool, and I'm just going to put it right here. So you can see the vendor data is the first thing going into the union tool. And then I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to drag it down here. And you see there's a 2 on here. It's saying that's the second data set being unioned. So by default, this is auto-config by name, but I know that the names of my fields are a bit different. So I'm going to say manually configure the fields. Okay? So this name field, I'm going to move under vendor names, and the source I'm going to move over as well. And now these two data sets will get union together. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to do a fuzzy match. So I'm going to grab this fuzzy match, and I'm going to drag it onto the canvas. So now let me kind of explain why I created a record ID field, why I created that sources field, and how we're going to do our match. So you'll see with Alteryx's fuzzy matching tool, there's two methods. There's purge mode and there's merge mode. So in purge mode, all records are compared to one another. So if I wanted to basically look at vendors that may be potentially the same vendor, they may be spelled slightly different, I would just have my one data set and I would use purge mode, and I would check every record with every other record in the data set. Well, that's not the case here. We're doing merge mode. We have two different sources, so we're going to use merge. The source ID field is the source column. So this tells the fuzzy match tool what are the two different sources in the data set. The record ID field we need because when it finds a match, it's going to output the record ID from both sources so we could join it back and get our details. The next thing I want to show you is obviously here we're going to go with the vendor name. And the match style, I can basically specify name here, I can specify company name, but I'm going to leave it as custom. I'm going to leave it as custom because I kind of want to show you the fuzzy matching capabilities within Alteryx. So I could pre-process the file here, which I'm not going to, but I could if I wanted to. There's nothing for me to pre-process in the vendor name field because I've already cleaned it up. Generate keys, I can specify the type of keys I want to generate. I'm not a huge fan of SoundX or SoundX with digits, so I'm going to leave the default because I like the default. So then the match function, I want to show you that real quick. So Alteryx has two different matching algorithms that you can use. It has Levinstein's distance and Jarl. And I usually pick this one because I like the results of this one. So I'm going to pick best of Jarl and Levinstein's distance. So what it's going to do is going to run the two different fuzzy match algorithms on the data set and output whichever is the best results. However, what happens at times is the results of Jarl and Levinstein's distance are the same, so you get two records, and we'll address for that in the next step. So my match threshold is 80%. So I'm going to say, okay. And down here, I want to output the match score and the generated keys. I want to do that so I can show you guys what kind of happens when it runs both algorithms. So I'm going to quickly stick a browse over here and now run this from here. And you can see it run extremely fast. So here, I'm hoping I'm going to have some examples. I'm just looking right here. So you can see that record 9438 and 2889 matched here, and it matched here. I have a duplication. And you can see it's 100% match. So I have a record that matched 100% on the name. The reason you're seeing two data sets is because Jarl, one of those are the results of the Jarl's algorithm, and one of them is the results of the Levinstein's distance algorithm. So what we're going to do in this case is Alteryx has this great tool in preparation called Unique, and we're going to drag that to the canvas, and we're going to say give us the uniqueness of record ID and record ID 2. So on the duplicate, when I run this, will be any records that were duplicated, but the unique records will come out the unique side. So as you can see, though, here, this doesn't tell us much. This doesn't tell us what vendor matched with who on the OFAC list, or consolidated screening list. This is not an OFAC list. I'll get to that later. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and get our details. Okay, so we'll get the join here. and I'll leave that on the right side. And I'm going to go back to here before the select because I want all columns in the output. Because if I went to here, I'm only going to get the 3 fields I selected. On this output, I get all fields. Okay, so I'm going to join the record ID, and because my right input has a record ID already, it will automatically select that field. So because I've already got record ID up here, it automatically renames this to right record ID, saying that this is the record ID from the right input. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to uncheck it because I don't need a duplication on it. I'm going to keep the rest of these fields in here for now. So I'll rerun this again. Oh, I have an error. So this is a good error. So you can see that I have an error that says string fields can only be joined to other string fields. Okay. So if record ID here, did you see is int 32, but up here I had changed the record ID to a string. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to change this record ID to a string here and run this workflow again. And there you go. So this time it ran, it didn't error out. So if you look at the join, I now have my 19 unique records that match a different record on the other side, which is record ID 2. So what I'm going to do now is grab another join here. Oops. And I'm going to go to this prior to the select, so we get all our fields. And this time, I want record ID 2. Okay? So down here, oh, let me just see something here, make sure this was unchecked. Yeah. Excuse me. So down here, you'll see there's record ID 2. I want that as my input, and it's going to match to the record ID from up here. So the reason is a record ID 2 is because the fields were exactly the same, it just renamed record ID to record ID 2. So I'm going to quickly run this as well. And this is actually the results of my test. So if I look on the join side, which is what we're looking at, you can see that I have, let's look at this record. So in my vendor, I have a vendor called Alexander Nikolic. And these are all my vendor fields to the left, okay? If I scroll to the right, this is the source of the government file, and you can see that it matched with, so we look for the name. Oh, I must have passed it. Oh, right here. It's the exact same name. Sorry, I was on the wrong record. So it was this record. So it's the exact same vendor that matched this person on the sanction list, right? We have one here that's Forest. It's some Iran program. And if you scroll to the left, we have a vendor named Forest. We have one here, Electronics Components Distributor. And if we scroll and see what's on the government site, it's Electronics Components Industries. So this is that fuzzy matching algorithm. But what I would do is to clean this data set up even further, I would add a select and just drop the fields I don't need. Like I don't need record ID 2. I no longer need record ID. I don't need the match score or the match key. I could drop the right record ID just to finally clean my data set. And then I can output this to any file format I want. I can output it to an Excel file, to a Tableau file, because I want to dashboard the results. But I'm just going to stick a browse to it for now and run it one final time. And these are the final results of this test. So a couple of things that I would do here is documentation. There's two different ways you can do documentation, right? You can click on the actual tools, all the tools, click on the tag, and basically annotate what you want that to say, right? So I could click here and I could just say annotation, create record ID for unique value, okay? And as soon as I click off, you'll see right under the tool, it's telling me what that tool is used for. That's one way of doing it. The way I like to do it is I like to go to documentation on the menu, grab a comment box, and start documenting that way. So here I could say, I can move it around because the tags could only be below and above. I can move this around any way I want. So I could say import vendor master. So now I know I'm importing vendor master here. So this is a complete workflow, which I will send out for those that didn't get a chance to get the data set to follow along. The only thing that you're going to have to do is, give me a second, I'm going to clear the cache. So now this data set is not cached. But what I'm going to do is I will send you this whole workflow minus my API key, and you guys could just put your own API key in there. And you have a completed workflow here. I purposely didn't document it, this one. In case you have any questions, you can email me or Greg, and we can get you the answers for this workflow if you're wondering why we did certain things. I'm hoping my explanation covered it. In addition, I just want to show you guys one other thing. I created this workflow for you guys. I'm going to send this out to you guys as well. So this is actually properly documented, right? You see suspect vendors, what we're doing here. On the right-hand side, I have links to where the data is being downloaded as well as the file descriptions, okay? So here, this is the exact same vendor data set. The same fuzzy matching, everything happening here is exactly the same as what we just did. The difference is this is OFAC data. So this is the OFAC SDN file, this is the OFAC alternate names file and address file. And I've already built this out. The nice thing about this is you can see here, I'm going to the government website. For the OFAC list, we do not need an API key. So I'm basically going out, I'm downloading the sdn.csv file, I'm downloading the alternate name CSV file and the address file. And you can see here's the download tool. Everything else that I'm doing in this part is exactly the same as what we just covered here. You know, I'm creating rows and then I'm parsing the file. Here, you can see that the difference is that I created a record with the column names. This was based off of the information I gathered from this URL right here, the data specifications. And then the other difference is here, instead of taking names from first row of data, I'm taking the field names from the right input metadata. And the metadata is considered the field names here. So that's one big change that I've done here. The other change that I've done here is because in the OFAC data, we have vendor names, but we also have alternate names that those vendors go by. What I did was I unioned those two columns together to basically get a unique data set so you can cross-reference your OFAC with your vendor master here. And I will send this out to you guys as well because I think most of you guys are going to want to cross-reference with the OFAC list versus this sanction list, but some of you will use this sanction list as well. So you now have two analytics right here that will cross-reference your vendor master with two different government lists, the OFAC list and the sanction providers list. And if I run this one, it actually, oh, I have an error message. I turned this box off, so I've added containers, and I clicked here, and that turns the container off, and that's why I had the error. So if I turn it on, I can now run it. It'll run just fine. And once again, this data set is being downloaded fresh from the government's website. I could close the container this way and still run it. It'll still run because you see this bar is blue. But I will share this as well. Greg, anything you want me to cover or add?
No, we've been getting a lot of good questions. We just had one that came in from Hunter, which was what happens when the format of the source data is changed. I figured that would be a great one to take live.
Yeah, sure. So if the format of the source data changed, so I'm assuming we're talking about the government website data set. If you have an API key, and that's why most sites now have API keys, so they have your information. If they change the data set, they will email you and let you know that they've changed the data set. So this data set for this consolidated screening list did change. I did receive an email. I have APIs for, like, I'll give you another example. I do for T&E, I'm going to say Concur data. I have an analytic I do where I check for transactions on holidays, like say Christmas Day or New Year's Day, that type of thing, right? National holidays. I go out to an API and I download the data set live from a website to identify holidays, because every year the holidays are going to change, and you don't want to have to update that through an input data set. I recently received an email from them telling me that their data set is changing in structure, so I updated my workflow to account for that. If it was your vendor master that was changing, and it's possible it could be, because you could have multiple vendor master data sets if you've acquired another firm or whatever the case may be. This is why I have this select tool. So I can rename fields, so downstream, this whole process will run just fine. So it won't matter if next time I load this vendor data set, there's 20 fields in there versus 7 or 8 I have now. It's what you're passing downstream. That's why with this select, I'm only selecting the 3 fields. So over here I'm selecting vendor name. Long as next time you load your data set, if you rename your vendor to vendor name, then it's going to run just fine. So let's just say you had SAP data. In SAP, in the vendor master, which is the LFA1 table, the vendor name field comes in as name 1. So you could just rename that name 1 here to vendor name, and that's it. Everything else will run just fine downstream.
Awesome.
Are there any other questions, Greg, that I can address in the session here?
We were able to get most of them answered already, mainly just around the data and will we be passing along the recording, et cetera. So we definitely will be passing along the recording. As Parm mentioned, you'll be passing along these workflows to y'all as well. So if you have a trial, you can plug these in and play with them, and feel free to edit or adapt them. Let's see if we get any more questions here. We got one. Is there something you recommend to find useful APIs? Probably another good one for you, Parm.
To be completely honest, there is a website. I forgot the name of the website. I could send it by email. It has API information for almost every type of application out there, whether it's Concur or Workday, as well as government lists or holiday lists. It's called Programmable Web. Sorry, that's it. Programmable Web. If you go to Programmable Web, it will give you the API information for every API out there, most of them anyways, and how you should configure your API to download the data, what you need, what type of authentication, things like that. Some APIs are difficult. So I'll give you an example. Some APIs you need to pass header information, like how do you want the information back, like application JSON. You may have to pass parameters, like say date parameters and things like that. What I do in that case is I downloaded Postman. It's a free download, and I practice sending information to the API through there. If I'm successful, I will then convert it into Alteryx and use this download tool to pass the exact same information, and then I see the information coming back as well. So I've used Alteryx to connect to about 6 different APIs successfully without any issues. And one of the APIs were very difficult because you post to the API, then they send you a sequence number back, which you then post to see if your job's been completed, and you have to basically loop through that checking to see when it's completed, and when it's completed, they pass you back a different sequence number, then you pass that sequence number to download your data. I was able to do that in Alteryx, no problem at all.
Great.
Are there any other questions there, Greg?
I'm just checking here. Let's see, we got a few more. So that was the APIs. Can we use the URL anytime in the future? Is the next one we have here.
Absolutely. So I'm assuming you're talking about this URL. Yeah, so once you guys get your own API key, just plug it in here. This is my API key. And just you could run it as often as you want. I've been using this URL now for about 6-7 months. These ones, for the OFAC list, it's just these are the URLs for them, and that's where the data set's always going to be. Back in 2000, when I worked at ACL, that's what the URL was and hasn't changed. So yeah, and I'm going to provide it to you this way so you guys can continue running this as is. The only thing you're going to change is this vendor data. You'll probably change it to your own data set. And what I would recommend is don't request vendor data from your IT department in an Excel file. Ask for access to your ERP environment and connect to it using ODBC. So you could just connect to it through ODBC. Alteryx supports 64-bit and 32-bit drivers. So you can basically connect to using 64 or 32-bit and connect directly into it. The nice thing with that is once you're connected directly into it, next time you open this workflow, all you have to do is hit run. It's going to grab the latest vendor master data set that's in your ERP environment, and nothing's going to change in this workflow. You just run it once a month and you're set.
Fantastic. And we have another one. Also, the sanction list is limited to North America? Question mark.
No, this sanction list is actually more international than it is North America. So if you look over here, wait, let me go to the actual data set. Oh, let me run this again. Oh, actually here. So you'll notice that the sanction list here tells you the source. So like this is the program is Syria, this is Iran, this is Cuba. So these are individuals or companies international. It will have North America data as well, but in this case, the hits that we got were these programs that they fell under.
We're not seeing the screen. You might be doing specific to Alteryx, but we're not seeing
sorry.
whatever you have. There you go. Yep,
sorry, my screen is paused.
That's
so
okay.
I'm just looking at the hits here. So you can see under programs, the programs will define where these people are, or individuals, or vendors, or companies. So this consolidated screening list has individuals, has entities, as well as vessels. So this forest was actually a vessel, so this could potentially be a false positive. So it's not just North America.
Perfect.
It's international.
Okay. And then the last one for now, unless we have any others, what is the name of the tool PARM SETI used to access APIs, and then in parentheses, besides Alteryx?
Oh, Postman. So Postman is a free download. It's spelled the way it sounds, Postman, like the mail delivery man, Postman. It's a free download. So I usually test all my APIs in there and then transfer them into Alteryx and then build out my workflow in Alteryx. Just because sometimes a lot of the error messages that come back, it's easier to decipher what's happening in Postman. It gives you more information.
Perfect. Well, that looks like the last question, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. If there's any other questions, I went ahead and put in PARM's email as well as my email into the chat, so feel free to follow up with us via email. We'll also be sending over the recording as well as the workflows that PARM built out today. PARM, thanks so much for running the training. Just a reminder to everyone, we have 2 more of these coming up, a week from today and the week following, so July 9th. At the same time, 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern, and July 16th at the same time. And those are going to be covering duplicate payments as well as suspect expenses. So really looking forward to continuing this. Look for our emails to get that recording and the workflows, and feel free to follow up in the meantime. Other than that, thank you all for joining today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the week and 4th of July ahead. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.